Hi guys, welcome to Codebook. This is Eric from Codebook, and I'm going to be explaining what really a PHP session is and when to use them. Now, PHP sessions. What the heck a session really is? Session is basically a way to establish a state for a user or for a request. So every time a request is made from the address bar to the web server to serve certain pages, web server has no idea who you are, has no idea whether you're logged in or you have the permissions to check this page. It's going to look for that asset you requested and present it back to the browser, which is rendered. So HTTP being stateless, sessions were invented, which basically gives us a way to identify a user, and if the user has the permission, we can write that logic and we can say, okay, you can access the page or you can't access the page. And we can also maintain their session length, the time, and if they didn't do any activity for a certain time, we can log them out automatically and request them to verify again. So a bit of security, bit of restriction. So how exactly sessions work? I'm going to show you by taking an example. So here I've got two files here on the same site, page 1, page 2. They all look same, and this is the structure of my page 1, a little bit of markup, and all I'm doing is echoing out here, which is there's nothing here, and the same thing I'm going to be echoing out here something. So we'll be starting a session, we'll be storing a value, name John, and we'll see if page 2, a value stored on page 1, can be accessed by page 2. Now how to do that? Well, the very first thing is to start a session, which is as simple as starting a session like so. Now starting a session basically looks for when you run this function, it's a PHP built-in function. What it does is it looks for whether a session has already been started, and if not, it's going to start one. So every time this session is started, a file is created on the server which has this long name. So basically a name, a 32-bit hexadecimal, a string, 32 hexadecimal string is created on the server. This string prefixed by sesh is the name of the file, and you can create as many sessions you want for each individual request or individual user, and it just keeps getting populated. And this is a file that basically contains all your session variables and their values, their keys and values. So basically sessions are stored in a global super global variable called _session, which is essentially an array, and we can say, let's say we can store a value called John, and every time we do that we must give it a key, otherwise we don't know how to access it, so we'll call it a name. Now I started a session, I used the super global with a key of name and stored this value, and I can go to page 2 and I want to access that value. In order to access that, we must start the session on page 2 as well. This is the very first line you must do before you access session super global array. The next thing I want to do is I want to store that value into a variable name, and I know that the key is name, so I'm going to use that, otherwise I can't find that value. Once the variable has that value on this page, I can echo that value. Where is that? Here. And I can do the same on page 1 as well. Let's go back to the browser and see what we see here. So we can see that there's an error because I have an initialized name variable in here. So I can say name is equal to, I can just say name is equal to John. Oops. I can say name is equal to John, and this is equal to the name. So basically I'm passing in a value stored in this variable to my session super global, and then that value can be accessed. over here in another variable. And let's go to the browser and see what we see. We see John and John, and if I change that value to a new value, a Jill, let's say Jill, and I'll save it. When we go back, it refreshes and it shows us Jill and Jill. So both the pages have access to a value that is stored in the super global session array. Now, how exactly this works? Every time session start function is called, a file is created on the server, and at the same time, bear in mind this 32-bit hexadecimal string, this value is also placed. If we open a Firebug here, we'll see that basically, so if you notice that this value has 6G8T, and basically a cookie is created on the client side that has the same value, the string. So every time the request is made, the request headers will contain this value, and it will be passed to Apache, which in turn is going to pass to PHP script, and PHP will look for PHP will prefix sesh underscore in front of it, and then look for a file on the server directory if the file exists, and it will validate that by matching both the strings, and then it's going to look for the contents of this file, whether there is any key value pairs, and if this key matches, it's going to present that value, the key that we specified. So that's how exactly it works. So what type of session storage options are there? We have just looked into this file-based storage where we create a file on the server. You can also, there are also database-based session drivers. So a session can be stored in a database, and cache-based where the sessions are more secure. Creating a file-based driver can be, for larger applications, can be hard to sometimes access because they just keep getting they populate. If you have a really high traffic website, this will fill up pretty quickly, and database is often a great choice. You can also permanently store them, and in the future you can make some kind of logic. You can store different request headers, for example, which device was used when the request was made, or which browser was used when the request was made, and all those values can be stored in the database as well, which in turn can make some sense. The top 5 devices user is using, so if he logs in from a different device, I'm going to notify user through email, hey, you just logged in. If it's not you, then do this. If it's you, then continue browsing. Anyway, that's another thing. Now, when to use sessions? Every time you want to share some data across different web pages on your site, you want to restrict user from accessing certain part of your website unless he's logged in. Sessions, use the sessions. How to use them? I just showed you. How to start a session? Just use session_start function. It will start a session if it hasn't already been done so. How to end a session? Very easy. All you have to do is call this variable called session_destroy. Usually it's called at the end of the page, or you can call it here if you want to destroy it right now, or it's usually called in the logout script. When a user logs out, a session is destroyed. And additionally, you can also do, if you just want to unset the name, but you don't want to really destroy the file completely, then you can just do unset, and then you can pass $_session name, and that will unset only this key, but other keys won't be changed. Or if you want to get rid of the whole file, you can just run this, and once you refresh it, just refresh the page here, and when you come back to the it's page 1, and if you refresh this, run, so the script is red, you will notice that the file no longer exists in our temporary directory, which means there is no session data. So session destroy destroys it all. And another thing I want to show you is we'll create a new session, and a new file is created for us. A new value has been set inside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this file in the editor, and I'm going to show you what's inside this file. If you open this file, permissions. Okay, so I've got permissions issue here. I'm going to copy this here. Let's just set up a couple of different values here. I'm gonna set the ID, and I'm gonna call it let's say 30. I'm gonna call it age. Okay, I'll set up two variables, and then I can go and copy this and just put it here somewhere and continue. And now I'm going to try to open it. When you open it, you'll notice it has a key value pair inside. Come back here, and then here you can access this file. So inside this file, you'll notice it has the key, which is name, and also the key, which is age, with a pipe, and it's a string value with a length of 4 characters, and it's an integer. It doesn't give us length, but it gives us a value. So the value is 30. It's an integer. It doesn't matter how long it is, it's just a value. So that's how it stores, and it just keeps getting populated as you keep adding different variables. So on the page 1, we created 2 variables, and we can echo them out here, like echo name, and also we can say here something like append, and we can say a pipe, and then we can append again. We can call it age, and we can go above here, and let's just set up our variable, which is age. So if I copy this here, and I can echo here, age. Let's go back to the browser and see what it gives us. So it gives us the name and the age, and it gives us name and the age. It took a little bit of time, but it's there. So the data we can set, for example, if this was a login page, we can ask the user to input the login information, and we can post using form to the script. Once we have that information, we can match it against the database records, and if it returns true, then we can set up our session variables, and we can put in a long string there, let's say, or we can just say logged in, and then we can go to other pages and write a logic. If the session exists, if the session has this value, which is logged in, is equal to true, or we can say here logged in true, or this returns true, then continue browsing. Otherwise, take the user back to the login page. He's not logged in anymore. So that's how sessions work. And how to end a session, I just showed you. How to secure a session, there's a thing called session fixation or session hijacking attempt, which basically is if someone has an access to this string, he can basically send this string in the request headers, and as long as the session file is there and it has that string value, it will be validated, and that person can gain access to the restricted pages, which is basically a security breach, because he didn't set up this value, he didn't authenticate, but he has this value. This value comes after the authentication is true. So how to fix this? By writing a little check. For example, we can generate this value every time the page is refreshed. So for example, all we have to do is session regenerate ID to true, and it will regenerate for us, for example, page 1. Sorry, I'll put it on page 1 here. So basically if we go to our temp directory, and every time I refresh the page, you'll notice it creates a new file with a new session name, and if I don't do this true, sorry, the true will override, but if it's not true, it's going to create a new file every time the request is made. So what I'm essentially doing is I'm refreshing this page, and every time I refresh this page, a new request will run these values and it will regenerate the ID. But if it is true, it's going to use the same file and delete the old one. For example, I can delete all of them, and it's going to, and then refresh, it's going to create file and regenerate the ID and override it. So that's how you can regenerate the IDs. That's why the old IDs will no longer be valid. So if you think the user will most probably is going to send a request or click on the page like in 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, so this value will stay the same. I can say here underscore session started is equal to time. So when the first time a session is started, it's going to set up the time in the session variable, and then I can run a check here if it's at underscore session started, and let's just say if it's not started, then I'm going to start one for me, else let's just say else if so we started the session when we first set up these variables, which would be at the login page, and the time at that time would be stored against this this key, and we'll compare it against the time now, and if the time now minus time in this key, if the difference is, let's say, more than what should we do? Let's just do usually 15 minutes, which is 900 seconds. Then if it is longer than that, then I need you to basically unset the session, we can regenerate the key, the ID, the session ID, session identifiers, and we can say like keep the file same and override the ID, and then we can reset the value of this session to current time, so the clock will start again. And so basically if the session is longer than 15 minutes, it's going to automatically refresh the ID. So based upon what resources you have, how powerful systems you have, you can do it more often, and you can continuously keep changing this value, and it will also change the cookie on the client side. That way the old session strings will be no longer valid, and it protects you against session hijack. And another thing we can do is, if there's no activity, it detects. So every time a request is made, it will update a variable called activity to the time, current time, when the request is made, and it's going to, for example, we can write another type of logic that if the time minus the activity is more than 900, then destroy the session and redirect back to the login page, because we will set a variable to the time the previous request was made, the variable was set to that time, and then when the new request is made, it's going to run this comparison, a validation. So that's something you can try yourself, and there are a couple of things you can do with session variables. It's really useful, it's powerful. And another thing you need to consider about the access and the modification. Now, when you're trying to set up variables, for example, you wanna set up the activity, last activity. PHP can check the last activity for us. There's a session lifetime set in PHP INI. Another thing I wanted to show you while we're here, that this directory path can be changed. You can write here session, and you can go to session save path, and then whatever path you specify. For example, I'm gonna call sessions, and then I'm gonna create a directory here called session. And you'll notice when I refresh it, it's on page 1, sessions, session save path is sessions. So why is it not working? Session save path, sessions. Maybe it requires absolute path, not relative. But yeah, you can set this variable. I'm going to show you where is it currently set, so it can be modified. We'll go to XAMPP, etc, PHP INI. We'll open this file. Now in this file, if you open, for example, save paths, this is what the PHP initialization file, the configuration file, has a session save path set for us, which is application XAMPP files temp. So in our applications, in XAMPP, and XAMPP files temp is the current file, and that file path can be changed to wherever you want. Make sure to give it 755 permissions or full read and write permissions. So web server basically can PHP can basically write and read a file and create a file for us. So that's, and there are a couple of other things you can set here, like if the cookies are not allowed on the client side, you can also set the session.name. It's by default called PHP session ID. You can call it something else, and there's so many options here. Most of them you can ignore because we don't really use. Now this is session maximum lifetime. This has to be, if you're using this kind of logic, that make sure you regenerate or you log out user if there's no activity for 15 minutes. Make sure if you want to do it 15 minutes, make sure this value is set to longer than 15 minutes. Otherwise your sessions will be considered as garbage and they'll be cleaned by the garbage collection process. I hope in this video you sorry, I forgot to mention about the access versus modification. Now every time how this time basically works is based upon the modified stamp on the file. So every time you open a page and it's just going to read the key value pairs but not write back to the file, it's called accessing the page, accessing the file. So this time will still continue running from the previous request or whenever the session was started. So it depends on which operating system you're using. For example, Unix, Linux, it's considered that way, but Windows has a different file system, so you may have the PHP may run differently. So based on the operating system, these are the things that you can basically implement this in your script. That way you're not relying on the access or the modification. So basically every time the file is modified, this clock will be reset to 0 because the session variable changes. Either it gets unset or set, or it's modified so the clock will restart and it won't be considered as garbage after this time is passed. But if your application is just accessing the variable set for the first time, then after this time is over, it's going to destroy the session automatically. So by creating this, essentially you can avoid this to happen. So that's the difference from in terms of access versus modification. If you still think you need a little bit more to understand how exactly they work, I can include a longer video in which we're gonna create an authentication attempt to authenticate a user, and we will demonstrate how exactly these security aspects come into play: session hijacking and access versus modification, and regenerating the session ID. And what if this cookie is not allowed? If the client has disabled cookies, for example, deny cookies from localhost, and if I deny cookie, I cannot really send a cookie in the request headers. So how to do that? In that case, it'll be a constant system identifier will be used, and in this video we'll just assume that the cookies are allowed. But if you would like to know more about that, just post some comments and make sure to subscribe. If you like this video, give it a like and share on the social media so I can keep making more of these videos. It takes a long time to make these videos. Thanks for watching. I hope this video has helped you a little bit more understand about sessions and how they work. Play around with the options set in the PHP ANI and how to set those session paths, session lifetime values, and there are tons of other options. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.